is mild, and there is, in fact, all what has been made as a problem in the early 90s remains also, it leaves a lot of consequences for the whole period up to now. We can also look at this before getting to some other data. I would like to point, for example, that for example, if you look at the 20 years between 89 and 2009, the best performer is Poland. Poland is at, in 2009 at 180% of what it was at the moment of the demise of the communist regime. Followed by, quite surprisingly, but in fact, starting from a very low point, Albania, with 166%, and then Slovakia and Slovenia. Hungary and the Czech Republic are somewhere in the middle of the round, while Romania and Bulgaria are below these. Well, Bulgaria, not so bad, but with the Bulgarian data, I have some problems with them. Certainly, the hugest problem is in the former Yugoslavia with Serbia and Montenegro, you can imagine also. And why? And we don't have to put the data here for the nice post-Soviet republics where Ukraine, Moldova, and others fare very badly, while the Baltic states are in significantly better shape. We can look also, perhaps for not having such a dismal evolution, because in fact, if we look also, there has been, the growth has resumed, and there has been some growth in some countries from the mid-90s, in other countries like in Romania from 2000, but there has been economic growth in the region, not enough. We can look also at a better indicator. The Human Development Index is a Human Development Report of the United Nations Development Program, has been published very, in fact, 1 month ago on the internet. It is also available in hard copies, so one can look at them. And if we look at the data which are compiled there, certainly that we have some countries for which there is no data in the first phase, because Yugoslavia in 1990 wasn't the best moment to collect data. Or even for Czechoslovakia, one has to look at the combined data for Czechoslovakia. But if you look here at the data, you can see that there was basically progress in all countries at the Human Development Index, as it was also in the world. But still, if we compare the world average, even we can be proud to be above the world average. Certainly the world average combines also some countries which have very much weight, like China or India or Bangladesh, with also countries, African countries, and so the global average is depressed by populous but underdeveloped countries on other continents. So it's not surprising that even post-communist countries, which in European comparison are not so well, make it much better in the global range. Still, the growth of Human Development Index is differentiated, and the differentiation occurred basically in the first half of the 1990s. Certainly there were also later some problems, but basically it is the 1990s which were more divergent than the 2000s. And if you look here, you can see also the fact that the former Visegrad group and Slovenia outperformed the global average, while Romania, Bulgaria, and nothing to say about the former Yugoslav republics, except Slovenia has lower increases than the global average. So this in fact confirms what we have already seen according to GDP per capita. Certainly GDP per capita is also one of the components of Human Development Index, but it's not the only one. So basically we could also see that there was some divergence in the early 90s and then a certain amount of convergence later. Convergence also inside the world, convergence also in economic terms in Europe towards a bit of catching up with respect to the EU 27 average. One can check in Eurostat, and this is also to be seen. Behind this convergence, there is clearly a major factor, and this is the overwhelming influence of the European Union. It is the influence of the European Union and of its decision to integrate the region of East Central Europe inside it. This prompted, gave a major signal for foreign direct investments, which were crucial for the economic growth period, and this also was an overwhelming force and impulse to some institutional improvements in all these countries. It was this huge project of getting to become member of accession, which was a driving force, gathering momentum and forcing even politicians to concede some improvements, because often politicians were not the champions of improvements, but they knew if they resist, they will be pushed aside. So this was the problem. Certainly, it's also the problem that after accession, the political life in all countries, all post-accession countries, became very volatile and prone to very many excesses. Look, you can look also to Romania with the deterioration of political life after accession, but you can look also to Poland, you can look also to Slovakia, you can look also to Hungary, I would say, where it was much more conflictual political life and much more erratic and irresponsible promises and policies after accession. So this is a problem, and it's also a problem of our hope that the EU will develop stronger structures of disciplining the national governments and national political elites or economic elites. Certainly there are also a lot of problematic aspects which I don't want to eliminate from the table. There is much more. We could look social polarization. We had there in the presentation of Latarkov and Dragošaličika only 1 year of Gini. If we would look of the Gini indicator for different periods, let's say immediately after the demise of communism and nowadays, there is in almost all countries an increasing inequality. We have the poor quality of political life we have already discussed. We have a certain decay of civic values, which is a problem and which should concern all of us. And we have also the economic volatility and vulnerability of these economies, which has been exposed by the current economic crisis. In fact, the economic decline has been stronger in most of the post-communist countries than in the old members of the EU. And this with an interesting situation, because, for example, the vulnerability, the volatility of economic situation was even stronger in some countries which were labeled as very performing, like the Baltic countries. Romania is also a case in point of such a vulnerability, but here I would say that we have managed to make very much of the crisis ourselves. So it was not just vulnerability to external shocks, it was also a self-made crisis. This is also a problem which leads us to discuss how big the legacy of the early 1990s is. For example, in some aspects, as discussed, for example, for the universities, it is clear that we are still paying the price of, let's say, lack of policies already from the early 1990s, and of lack of social involvement, let's say, installment of falsified hierarchies of values, etc., and the bad habits in the institutions. In other situations, for example, it's the legacy of the more recent past, which is the problem. So this is somehow an open question, and we'll still have to discuss which is the burden of the failed or successful policies of the early 90s, and which is, let's say, the burden or the, let's say, good legacy of policies which are more recent. But this is an open question, and it cannot solve everything now. Thank you very much for that.
We'll take some questions now. You ready? Yes, we're tired. After a long day. Thank you, Professor Murgescu, for the excellent keynote lecture and for your remarks. And I hope that overall we succeeded to a certain extent, fulfilling the task that we set up for ourselves at the beginning of this conference and the beginning of this project. Especially our foreign guests, we're looking forward to collaborating with you in the future, and hopefully we'll be able to bring more people and keep them here a bit longer than merely a one panel. We were more than delighted to have you as guests and speakers at our event, and we'll keep in contact. We'll see how we can proceed with this project a bit further. I have to discuss it with Professor Murgescu. We should try to consider maybe a publication project and see where exactly and under what circumstances. But we'll We'll look into that. We'll see what we can offer from that point of view, and then I will send you an email to all of the contributors and say if you agree to the conditions that we managed to set up, we will go on and proceed with the publication project. Okay, thanks a lot again, and thank you for the other people in the audience for staying with us throughout the